Hello, everybody. We're back again with another episode with a topic that I feel that, and I hear a lot, is when it comes to improving ourselves or changing ourselves or fixing ourselves, it's kind of like the beginning that we need to look into or work on, which is awareness. So maybe we can start with even defining, explaining what is awareness.
Great. It's nice to be back. And I agree with you. Awareness is sort of the first step and always a means of, always something to celebrate. So as we talked about before, it's commonly known in self-help and neuroscience that 90 to 95% of our perceptual awareness, the thoughts we think, the actions we take, the words we choose, the habits we perpetuate are subconscious, AKA below the level of our awareness. It's like we're not piloting that vehicle of consciousness. We're just sort of being taken along for a ride. And so we could define awareness in various ways, but for the sake of metaphorical alignment, we're looking at awareness as, are these things in your mind, in your awareness, versus are they subconscious? Because if we're trying to make a change or we're trying to find that authentic alignment, and men are trying to evolve and grow and step into that magnetic masculinity, it requires authentic alignment, which requires awareness of what does work for us, awareness of what does not work for us. And then it also involves self-awareness. So the first step is becoming aware of awareness, and even men being able to look and say, oh, wait a minute, 90 to 95, and again, that changes, but that's a sort of a generalized guideline. 90 to 95% of what I do is below the level of my awareness. And then it's choosing to want to become aware of and curious about, or use that metacognition, it's called. That metacognition could be another word for awareness, or metacognition is sort of zooming out and becoming aware of our thoughts, aware of our actions, and thereby giving us a chance to make a conscious choice in them rather than running those subconscious programs, habits, behaviors, and patterns that may not serve our highest good or a man's authentic alignment and therefore magnetic masculinity.
Okay, so starting with even awareness of awareness, what have you noticed that is getting in men's way that you have worked with of even becoming aware, or what even helps with that initial awareness? Because that in itself is like big opening, but to get there, like what are some of the things that are maybe getting in way to get there, and then what helps to actually get there?
It's a great question. So let's look at barriers to awareness. So first of all, barriers to awareness would be the fact that it's quite literally subconscious. By the very nature of being subconscious, sub-aware, out of awareness, it's below the level of your awareness. So the first step is a choice, or just a curiosity. Curiosity might be the optimal word. A curiosity about like coming into the present moment, being curious about why you do things without judging, blaming, shaming anything that you do. Because a big barrier to awareness is shame, judgment, embarrassment. Basically, it can be very challenging, especially for men, to look at parts of themselves that don't fit their self-concept because they've been so programmed to, this is what it means to be a man. And then not only in society, but this is what in their family, in their religion, in their country, in their generation of what it means to be a man. So like we've talked about before, we confuse fitting in with love and belonging. So in childhood, we sort these different parts of our personality. And anything that we believe that would create rejection externally, any part of us, like maybe a man cries when he's a child and his dad says, suck it up, or be a man, or don't be a crybaby. In that moment, he will deny, disown, disidentify and compartmentalize the part of himself that has emotional needs, it will become below the level of his awareness and it will not fit his self-concept. So a big barrier to awareness is the uncomfortable feelings or challenging the self-concept. And also what I call, which we'll do another episode about, eating a shit sandwich or becoming aware of our blind spots, or sometimes referred to as shadow work, but in corporate culture, we call it blind spots. And that is looking at so we develop over time, we develop the parts of ourselves we identify with and the parts of ourselves we don't identify with. And since most of those parts or aspects of our personality, our multidimensional personality, are in the subconscious, again, they're below the level of our awareness. And if we're not aware of them and mentoring them, I often say it's like, imagine that you have a boardroom in your mind and you are the CEO and you want all of the C-suite team, you want all of the board members, you want all of the senior leadership to have a seat at the table of your consciousness so that you have them within your awareness and you understand their wants, needs, boundaries, values, because that again helps men towards authentic alignment, which is a big component of magnetic masculinity. And if any of these parts, again, don't fit our self-concept and they've been banished to the subconscious, if we don't give them a seat at the table of our consciousness so that we can really look at them with honesty and integrity and sort of give them, I say, a chance to hold the talking stick in that board meeting, then what happens is they do a hostile takeover from the subconscious because they're kind of pissed at us because they've been rejected and forced into the subconscious and disidentified from and inauthentic. What happens is they do a hostile takeover of the talking stick and facilitate some of our less adorable behaviors or our misaligned behaviors that go below the level of our awareness, because we would look at those parts of us as bad or wrong or unacceptable or unmanly or weak or abusive or whatever it is. So then we end up protecting our self-concept and prioritizing that over awareness. Another barrier to awareness for men can be that it often involves feeling some slightly uncomfortable sensations in our body that we call emotions. So looking at those things can make men feel emotions that they haven't been trained how to feel and process fully.
With You said that one of the things that can help is curiosity.
Yes.
How can, because I feel like a lot of times with men, they might be in a situation where those emotions of shame, judgment, embarrassment, they kind of judge them. So how you approach emotions that you're judging with curiosity?
Well, again, I think we will probably do a whole episode unpacking emotions in the navigation system. But essentially, curiosity gives us more of a compassionate edge and more of like an inquisitive sort of energy behind that inquiry rather than judgment or looking at those parts of ourselves and saying, ew. It's sort of looking at ourselves with curiosity and saying, and maybe making assumptions like, I don't know who I am necessarily, or which parts of me are coping mechanisms, which parts of me are protector personalities, which parts of me are my parents. You know, we all have these parts of us, this software that we developed in childhood that is very normal when our brain was in the theta state before the age of 7, that are just basically, we're just running other people's old outdated software. And that's where learning about the vehicle of consciousness metaphor that we did in episode, I believe 2 episodes ago, and understanding how to remove some of that software. But it involves being curious about what's there instead of judging it or shaming it or being embarrassed of it or any of those things, because then they're going to just keep continually getting pushed to the subconscious, because that's why they were there. That's why they're below the level of our awareness in the first place. So
Yeah.
curiosity, lightheartedness, I like to treat it all as just information. And I remind men that the worst thing that can happen is that your brain is going to run an old sort of program. It's going to send a chemical sensation, a particular formula of chemical into your body that you're going to experience as a sensation, and then it's going to pass.
Yeah.
And that sort of helps them feel safe to go to some of these places where they've been behaving inauthentically, trying to fit in, suppressing parts of themselves, or not willing to look at the parts of them that that could just use a little bit of mentorship or a little rewriting of the software, an OS update, or a whole new program, maybe, without
Um,
making any of it mean anything. The other thing that also goes below the level of our awareness is our awesome. So as I've said to you, and you've seen me say before, is it's part of it is owning our awesome and owning our shit. But in order to own those, without making either of them mean anything, but in order to own those things, and in order to be able to not be running in this 90 to 95% subconscious where you're not actually making free will choices, you're just basically like a robot going through the motions of inauthenticity, involves being curious, because that curiosity can be the catalyst for awareness. And again, awareness is always a celebration, even if we're like, oh, I have clients that'll tell me something that's happening at work or in their relationships, and we're like, oh, so you're kind of being mean, or you're kind of bullying your employees or something. And it's never about judging that. It's about celebrating the awareness, because we can retrain our brain to welcome blind spots, to welcome awareness opportunities by not giving it more of the emotions, the judgment, the shame, the embarrassment that caused them to go below the level of our awareness in the first place. So we celebrate it. My clients will sometimes be like, hey, Sandy, I found myself being really insensitive and rude today. And I'm like, that's amazing. You nailed it. I'm so proud of your awareness. So we don't beat ourselves up for what we did when we didn't know better. It's below the level of your awareness. Instead, we celebrate that ever expanding awareness. And that sort of creates momentum, because then our brain, instead of trying to avoid the pain and discomfort, will seek it out because we're giving it a reward, kind of like training a dog. Like, as I often say, either you train your brain or your brain is training you. So we can train our brain to welcome those self-awareness opportunities, because all that happens is we feel mildly uncomfortable for a couple of seconds or a few minutes, maybe an hour. I call it eat your shit sandwich, you're fine. And then it's going to pass, and then you get to level up. That's how we actually level up, is through this awareness. It's what we make it mean. It's what we make those things mean that cause us to stay blind to them.
so how about raising awareness or being curious in areas within yourself or your life? And maybe you have worked with some men who had that, or they went through that, where they have this assumption or belief that it's set in stone. So they don't even think of questioning it or not seeing it as not true. How can they approach something that they feel like is set in stone, and it's like, I can't change it about me, even though it might not be true? How can they transition into that curiosity piece and challenging that? What are some of the things that help them?
Wow, that's also a great question. So first of all, we have different ways that we can um, sort of inspire change. And the most common way is that staying the same in your inauthenticity becomes so excruciatingly painful that the pain of staying the same outweighs the discomfort of expansion. Like we talked about before, if I'm going to build a muscle and I go to the gym and I start lifting a weight and my bicep muscle gets really uncomfortable, I celebrate. I make it mean I'm growing, even though it's uncomfortable. That's what eating a shit sandwich is like. And that's why I call it that, to make it light and kind of humorous, so we don't get stuck in like shame and guilt and blame and judgment. So again, it's sort of celebrating it. But I would invite people, instead of waiting for things to get so painful, instead, they can start to be curious, because that's really how we level up. That's really how we expand and grow and become empowered and piloting that vehicle of consciousness, rather than that everything running on that automatic software. And as men are expanding and growing and evolving and stepping into the power of authentic alignment and magnetic masculinity, again, either they're going to choose to grow and expand from a place of empowerment, or they're going to wait until it gets so painful that they have no choice but to face things. So, and there's no wrong way to heal, and there's no wrong way to expand. So that's sort of up to the individual. I like the proactive approach because it's less painful. But I used to prefer, or not prefer, it was below the level of my awareness. I used to when I was less aware, I used to just wait till things got so painful or uncomfortable that I had no choice but to look at them. And I would just invite people to consider that there are other ways that are just way more fun.
Yeah, it's something that I wanted to ask because you said that the other option is more painful. What if it actually doesn't seem more painful? Or as men are going through that pain that comes with, let's say, staying the same, they're not even aware that there's any other way. Like how to
True.
even like get that awareness or get out of that current state where this is just kind of the way it is.
Isn't that the great question? So some people would call, again, sometimes it's through hardship or becoming so uncomfortable, or say maybe multiple divorces or losing your job or people not liking you, or just knowing this sort of existential angst of knowing something is missing and wanting to go seek what it is, even if they believe that it's not them that's the problem in the beginning or that it's something outside of them. I think people are generally somewhat aware that they don't feel great. And when they choose to seek evolutionary excellence or alleviation of pain, either one can be motivators, then they're already in that curiosity. They're already sort of seeking. They're already aware that they want something to change, even though they might not be aware of what is the actual problem and how to fix it, which a lot of men do tell me when they come to me. They're like, I've tried yoga, I've tried meditation, I've tried this, I've tried that, I've tried therapy, I've tried coaching, I've tried all of these things. And they still feel like something is missing and they don't know what it is. And that's often part of that, is that it's that missing themselves. It's missing all of these characters that have been banished to the subconscious that actually make up our authentic personality or our authentic alignment. And those parts of us don't want, again, we should do another episode just about parts work, but those parts of our personality, those blind spots, it's important that we look at them with compassion, because all they're doing is trying to find coping mechanisms to get their needs met, because their needs weren't met in childhood because of how we are living in the emotional dark ages. So when they approach those with curiosity and compassion and acceptance, now, part of acceptance is accepting some things need changing. So, hey, I've been kind of insensitive to my wife and kids, or I've been really self-centered in this area. Or again, the flip side of that is when we're not completely owning our shit, we're definitely probably not owning our awesome either. So then men might feel frustrated, like they have imposter syndrome. A lot of them tell me, even CEOs, multimillionaires that I work with, PhDs, NASA engineers, they still feel like they have imposter syndrome. A lot of them tell me, like, I'm just worried that people are going to figure, if they know who I really am, they're not going to like me. So again, they're judging and shaming or avoiding below the level of their consciousness all of these parts of them that are actually the awareness of is a prerequisite to changing them. We have to become aware of them first. So again, we don't beat ourselves up for what we did when we didn't know better. We celebrate the awareness, celebrate the awareness, celebrate the awareness, because we're not meant to be perfect. This is a journey. This is a growth journey, right? So we're always going to be expanding our awareness and growing and growing and growing and growing. And the more we celebrate that and the more we train our brain to welcome blind spot awareness, the more integrated we become, the more authentic we become, the more empowered we become, because otherwise we're just, again, we're running that 90 to 95% of us as a program. It's not even who we really are. And all of these parts of us aren't being given a seat at the table of our consciousness, being allowed to hold the talking stick so that we can really get collaboration and empowerment in that team of ourselves, and then really propel ourselves into that authentic alignment and magnetic masculinity, and that state of clarity, confidence, emotional mastery, energy, inspiring to others, and all of the traits that all men are at their core. All humans are.
So what if when it comes to, let's say, becoming aware and approaching yourself with more compassion, what if there are men out there who don't even have a concept of self-compassion? They haven't either experienced it or they don't even know what it looks like, because that's one thing that I have realized in myself there's certain things that even self-compassion itself, like for me, I don't even know if I fully had that concept, because that's something that I realized this weekend, and I had the conversation with my friend about it, and she was like, "It actually makes sense." So what if somebody becomes aware, and you might even know you kind of should approach yourself with self-compassion, but they might not have that concept itself, and I feel like it's something that
Most don't.
especially men can go through as well.
Definitely. And men are definitely, well, and self-compassion can go to a healthy side, or the polarized side of self-compassion is self-excusing. Well, I was angry because that person did so and so. I did this because that person did that. So when we tend to behave out of alignment, we find excuses for it or externalize the cause of it. We're like, well, I'm not a bad person. I did that because that person was rude to me, or because this person cut me off, or because of that. So that's sort of like the opposite end of the pendulum swing, where we're not being accountable. And if we're, but so yeah, so this is what it typically looks like in a lot of humans. If we do something that's suboptimal, we say, well, it's because that person did this or that. And if somebody else does something, quote unquote, bad or wrong, we're like, look at you, you're bad. They're an angry person. We don't offer that same awareness or curiosity or compassion about, like, why did I behave that way? Why did that person behave that way? We're stuck in this subconscious dualistic good, bad, right, wrong, that is the symptom of shame. So self-compassion is really an important step before we do any of this work. And self-compassion is a skill that very often, in my experience, needs to be trained. And I sometimes work with people who have very harsh inner critics. A lot of men do, especially the high performers that I love working with. And it's turning that inner critic into an inner coach, or I call it giving them a promotion. So we want to take a look at that part of us, the inner critic. We want to give it a seat at the table of our consciousness. We want to be curious about it. We want to accept it, even though part of acceptance is accepting that some things need changing. And then we want to look at, hey, if I'm really critical of myself and I really judge myself and I'm harsh to myself, I'm probably judging and harsh of others. And I might be impacting myself and them. And then instead of shame collapsing or making that mean we're bad or wrong, approaching that part of us with compassion and saying, okay, well, why is that inner critic there? Well, that inner critic there is there to protect us. It's there to point out everything, every one of our flaws, because it thinks that hearing it from ourselves is easier than hearing it from external rejection, which is not true, but it's just a very common subconscious assumption we make in childhood. It's a very typical thing that we do. So again, we can look at that inner critic with compassion. Some men I will have will either use their children or a pet, or even some of them, if they can't get there yet, will use a vehicle or anything in their life that they appreciate, and will start training compassion and start practicing compassion. Or a very common metaphor is, if you wouldn't say it to a child or a puppy, don't say it to yourself. And if you would say it very harshly to a child or a puppy, that's okay too. Then again, that's where that eating our shit sandwich comes in, and saying, okay, I did do that. I'm aware of it. So that's amazing, because now I can change it. And now it can come more of my authentic alignment. Because if we feel guilty or uncomfortable about a part of us, it means that that part of us is not in our authentic alignment. It was a subconscious old nonsense program from childhood that we just became aware of. So now we level up. So again, it's starting to flip that narrative and starting to slowly practice self-compassion, which actually can be a really challenging barrier for a lot of people, because, like you said, it's very unfamiliar, especially for men, because it's a lot of cultures about, like, be tough, suck it up, don't be a sissy, don't be a pussy, don't be, no, don't cry about it, man up, toughen up. And so that self-compassion, which is a crucial component, is an important, the curiosity and compassion are important components that allow us to become aware or step into awareness more quickly.
Yeah. Another thing that I wanted to ask was about dealing with that awareness once it happens, especially at the beginning, where you might, let's say, men might go through the experience where some of those uncomfortable emotions they appear and they might become aware of them. Question would be, what have you seen is maybe the usual way of dealing it or approaching it, especially initially when it's like the first glimpses of awareness, and what would be good ways to approach it or better ways to go through that experience?
Well, what it often looks like is when those uncomfortable feelings come up, or an awareness, because awareness is always trying to move, right? It's always moving. We're energy in motion. Emotions are energy in motion. So they're always trying to move. But again, if we use that beach ball metaphor, it's like all these emotions and these awarenesses, however we want to look at them, are like inflated beach balls. And we've been pushing them under the surface, which requires a lot of energy. So if you're trying to push a beach ball keep it under the surface of water, it requires a lot of energy. So we have hundreds or thousands of these. But since men haven't been taught how to process and feel those emotions, which again, like I said, one of the easiest tools is to just remind yourself, hey, this is a chemical sensation that is going to be like calculated in my brain, sent out as a chemical signal in my nervous system, my body, my tissue. It's a chemical reaction that is a sensation in my body that I don't prefer, that's unpleasant, and then it's going to pass. So it's reminding ourselves it's safe to pass. But this is what it typically looks like, especially in men. It looks like, oh, an emotion comes, they grab a phone, start scrolling, looking at email, or they're like, oh, I have to go run errands. Oh, I have to go to the hardware store. Oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, I'm going to eat something. Oh, and it's just constant like movement. Oh, I have to watch TV. I'm going to watch something. Okay, tune everything out. Distracting. And what it can look like when we're choosing to focus on awareness and metacognition is scheduling some time to say, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to be present with whatever comes up. And that's going to require some strength and some bravery. And that's when we dig deep into that divine masculine. We're like, okay, I've got this. I'm strong. I'm going to do this. And you sit there and you just allow whatever wants to come up to come up. And you don't judge it. And you just think every unpleasant sensation that goes in your body, you celebrate it again. Just like we celebrate our shit sandwiches, you celebrate it. So we're training the brain. We're rewiring, reprogramming that supercomputer in the vehicle of consciousness to welcome awareness. Because the more knowledge is power. And if most of us is subconscious, we're not actually in power or control or empowerment or anything, or in alignment or in authenticity. We're just in this coping program. So we can sit down and just schedule time to just feel whatever. And it doesn't matter what happens. If you're angry, sad, neutral, I don't care. You're just scheduling that time to just sit and be with it and offer yourself self-compassion and cheering yourself on. This is great. I'm doing such a good job. Oh, I just felt like I was going to rage and I wanted to punch a hole in the wall, but I didn't. That's amazing. Or I sat and cried for 40 minutes. That's amazing. I nailed it. And then you think of all these like sort of beach balls that you're letting out to the surface, which is going to free up more energy to pilot that vehicle of consciousness on your authentic alignment. Like we talked about in the vehicle of consciousness episode, emotions are your navigation system. And it can also be helpful to remember that if we're not willing to go to the things that we find uncomfortable, emotions are sort of a package deal or a comparison or polarity. So if we're not willing to go to some of the uncomfortable ones, we pinch ourselves off a bit from feeling the ones that are truly rewarding and fulfilling and exciting and empowering. So yeah, does that answer your question a little bit?
Oh yeah. So anything you want to add as we close off?
No, I just think that, well, I said no, and then I started to do it. So I guess yes. I would just invite anybody listening, especially men, to really focus on the celebration of awareness. Be really curious It can obviously, this is what I do for a living as a life strategist. It can be very helpful to work with a coach because I know where the common patterns are. I know where the common blind spots are, and I can offer tools to train compassion and train curiosity and train the brain and master the mind. And I can help accelerate that process so that we can grow from a place of empowerment and excitement and authenticity rather than waiting for the pain to get so bad that we have no choice. For some people, a meditation practice helps, but again, if we're only doing that to avoid the discomfort that is actually the catalyst for our growth, or we're only doing that because we think that that's what a good person does, then we're actually perpetuating the shame and inauthenticity that is behind the discomfort that we're trying to heal from. Or we might be distracting ourselves, you know? So yeah, it's celebrating awareness. So awareness of awareness, you're now aware that you're not aware. That's a celebration. That's one step closer to having that, the leadership capacity as the CEO of all these parts of you at the table of your consciousness, so that you can start to create that collaboration and alignment with the trajectory of the team. So starting to release that which no longer serves us. So it's not tying up all our energy, pushing all those beach balls into the water, and being curious and compassionate about those subconscious parts that are doing the hostile takeovers below the level of our awareness and facilitating some of our patterns, behaviors, thoughts, and reactions that are out of our authentic alignment and magnetic masculinity.
Oh, I love that. And as usual, if you have any questions, you're able to leave them below. There's a link. And are you still giving the strategy sessions?
Yeah, we're going to keep the strategy sessions for a while. They won't be around forever, or they will be, I'll go back to charging for them, but we have a few spots still available for free strategy sessions.
All right.
And that's where we look at some of these common patterns, and it's a lot easier for me to help people see or help them become aware of what is below the level of their consciousness. And we can get a lot done in a short amount of time with no judgment. I don't judge anything that any client brings to me. To me, I see it all as information and ever expanding awareness that we can celebrate.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening. And we will see you next week.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.